Thank you all for being here. I'm Wendy Smolin.
And I'm Claire Green.
For generations, a stick, a ball, or an empty box were all we needed to play. But as technology shapes the world, kids no longer click their heels and pretend to go to Oz. They simply click a keyboard to make Oz the first stop on a virtual tour. Everything we knew about playing, sharing, reading, and even writing is being rewired. It's time to rethink which skills are important for the 21st century and how we can teach them.
We have to share. I know. The goal of the Sandbox Summit is to ensure that the next generation of players become active innovators rather than passive consumers of technology. And not that we're rushing you, but we do want you to leave here this morning thinking about three things. Play is as much a business issue as it is an early childhood issue. Technology should enhance, not overshadow, the benefits of play. And open-ended play is a valuable commodity. Don't sell it short.
Our keynote speaker is Andy Berndt, Managing Director of Google Creative Lab. Andy came to Google by a very creative path, proving there really is a convergence of play and technology. After his stints as a volunteer fireman, a would-be architect, and a carpenter didn't pan out, he entered the advertising field. He made a name for himself at Chiat Day, guiding the Think Different campaign, the launch of the iMac, and the introduction of the Apple online store. He then moved to Ogilvy as co-president. Eventually, he came to Google, where today he leads the marketing team's creative efforts. Not a bad resume. Yet, when you ask Andy what he does, he says only three things. I work, I sleep, and I play with my daughters Lucy and Alice. It's clearly the play that keeps him creative. Please welcome Andy Berndt.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for the invitation. I have to tell you, I'm really enthused getting here this morning because, first of all, I was asked by the tech guy if I was the tech guy that came to set up for the actual speaker, which means I still got it. Thank you so much. I was also really enthused by the gentleman in the lederhosen and the red socks and the Crocs. That is fabulous. Makes me feel at home. I'm not a speaker. I don't do circuits or anything like that. I spend most of my time working with people at Google and outside of Google, coming up with ideas. And I have to say, I'm feeling a lot blessed. I Googled some of you last night, and I'm not an expert in this field. I'm only an expert for perhaps two reasons, and that I have two kids, and that I'm actually truly a child myself, if an overgrown one. So I want to talk about two things that might be useful very quickly, and then I want you to, if you can, ask questions, or tell me I'm wrong, or ideally shout out while I'm saying something and object, because that's how fun conversations happen. Two things. So first of all, thinking maybe a little bit of a glimpse into Google and how the place works. A little glimpse into what we look for when we hire people. And secondly, one kid's perspective on play and where that might go a bit in the future. Sorry. Is that better? No. Is that better? So I just had a little...
No?
Project.
No?
Yes. This makes me feel so much better. This is good. So let's start at the beginning. I have to tell you. So every morning I go and get my cup of coffee, like we all do, and like we all do, and I look at that cup of coffee and I wonder what people see. Now, most people would just see, about a decade ago, would just see a cup of coffee, it costs 50 cents, completely generic, cream or no cream, sugar, no sugar, end of story, right? But somebody looked at that cup of coffee and they connected that with a bunch of other things. They connected that with the decline in ritual that's happening in our society. They combine that with the lack of a third sort of civic space. They combine that with the thought they combine that, does that work? They combine that with the thought of, hey, let's go have a coffee is sort of a lower impact version of, hey, let's go have a drink. They combine that with the idea of a luxury that we could all afford. And they made this thing called Starbucks. And is Starbucks an invention? I don't know. It's an invention in as much as you don't really need to understand anything that's submolecular. You don't need to understand code. You don't need to be a primary scientist. But it's things like that that really interest me. And there are a bunch of ideas like that floating around. I want to talk about a few of them and then talk a little bit about where play and toys and kids might run into that kind of thing. The second idea that I'm absolutely enthused about is this one particular version of this idea called elderwisdomcircle.org. Has anyone heard of this? No? Okay, good. Makes it more interesting. Somebody came up with the idea, someone looked across everything that's happening and they said, wow, what do we have in our society? We have all these people in retirement homes and nursing homes, and they're separated from their kids and their grandkids, if they have them. And then way over here on this other side, we have all these kids who don't have parents, except they're never usually contiguous in any way. So he said, well, what if we use some tools that are out there that are free, that are widely accessible, and we let kids who don't have sort of a grandparent figure in their life reach out to somebody who's sitting with all the wisdom in the world in a retirement home and maybe playing golf, but maybe a little sick of playing golf, and connect. That to me is an amazingly magical thing. It's made possible by something like the internet, but the internet isn't the idea. The internet's just the means. Another idea. So reading about water distribution in the third world and irrigation, the need for irrigation tools. Then reading about the fact that we have hundreds and hundreds of millions of these that go into landfills all the time. And you think, well, if you look at this thing, it's a bottle that holds water and you drink out of it. That's one way of looking at it. If you look at it another way, it's a piece of tubing with a connector on the end. And if it had a connector on both ends, and you screwed a lot of them together, they would be piping. And now, I told this idea to someone at Coke. And a good friend of mine, actually, and he looked at me like with this sort of squinty sort of pause, and I couldn't tell if it was because he thought that was brilliant or he just thought I had, had some sort of blunt trauma incident to my head, and I had just lost my marbles. But it's an interesting thought. Another idea. So there's a woman who works at Google, and amazing woman, and she beat cancer, and which has made her absolutely fearless. Nothing is too big for her to think. And she's from India, and she happens to work in infrastructure at Google, and she happens to understand some fairly deep technological aspects of computing. But what she was really interested in is the fact that in India, and I'm not calling out India here, I'm just saying there is corruption everywhere, but India has a huge corruption problem. And often the dollars that get appropriated centrally don't quite make it to where they're supposed to be. That's not a problem unique to India, but it's prevalent there. And she said, well, I have this idea because there's a law that was passed in India saying all this information is public. Any kind of appropriations data must be made public, must be made available to everybody. And
she said, well, that's great, but unless you can go to some central library and look through 100 million pages of paper and find the appropriation for the clinic or the school or the library that was supposed to come to your town, not that useful. So she said, what if I took all those appropriations and I indexed them in a database? Fairly simple notion. And then I geotagged them, which is a fancy way of saying I put little pins on a Google map to say wherever those dollars were supposed to appear to make something happen, there would be a little pin on a map. So if I was in a small village anywhere in India and I looked on one of those maps and I saw a couple pins, and one of those pins was supposed to be a clinic or a school or something like that, and I went over and I looked where that pin was supposed to be in real life and there was nothing, then I could make an appeal. And I wouldn't have to understand anything about advanced government appropriations or anything like that. I could just say, hey, I'm standing here and there's no school. And I thought, wow, like, can you imagine the number of people that could help? I mean, a billion people in India, like how many people's lives would be improved by that? And that wasn't, all those things she's talking about are very, very basic things. Very, very basic database. Geotagging is available for anybody. If you want to go on and see your house and you know, put some pictures up somewhere on the map, you can do it, or move the location of your house if you don't think it's appropriate or whatever. I mean, yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of political will and that kind of thing, but I'm amazed at people who connect things. Now, I don't have access to, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a coder, I'm not a scientist, I don't have access, I can't go under the hood and play with all the little tiny things and do primary work. I just connect things together, and so does my group largely. So I thought about this and I said, okay, well, where does this come from? And as I thought back, was there some toy? Was there like a magical toy in my youth that I played with, and it just got me to think this way? And I really couldn't think of a single toy. I just remember one instance, and we'll play a little therapy here from when I was a kid. You guys can help me with this. So it was one Christmas, and we lived next door to these people, and he was a doctor, and they had twins. Is this being taped for YouTube or anything? It is? Okay. It's good to know those kinds of things. And one Christmas, these two twins got these brand new bikes. And man, they were cool. They were shiny and they were beautiful. They were like the best bikes ever. And I didn't. And I was pissed. And what I did get, this would be interesting on YouTube, was, and I live fine, this is not a sob story or anything like that. What I did get was, my uncle was an insurance investigator, and he knew how to sort of go down to the police department and sort of buy bikes that had been like somehow mauled or destroyed or something in criminal activity. And so I got this bike that it must have been like folded in half or bent in half or something at some point, and then it was pounded back straight, but not like really straight, just sort of straight. And it was bad. Okay, maybe I'm still working through this. Maybe I'm working through it right now. And what I also got with this bike, they kind of threw this in, was this giant box of bike parts. And it was literally, I mean, I was smaller then, so maybe it wasn't that big, but it felt big. And it was just jammed with all these bike parts. Like maybe like they invaded some place where they stripped bikes and they like put all the junk in a box and they brought it someplace. And I had this box of bike parts. And my first response was, thank you. That's really great. Thank you, bike parts. But I took those bike parts and they were awesome. And all I did was I stuck parts together. And this was not like all the parts to one bike. This was like one part from every bike. And it was amazing. I spent all my time in that garage putting those pieces of that bike together. And we made the most ridiculous bikes, and I created a bunch of concussions in the neighborhood and things like that. But it was exciting. And we would stick bikes together and have 5 bikes in a row that were all tied together that would eventually crash. And it was fun. And I remember that so clearly. And thinking back, I think about the coolest thing about those bike parts was a lot of the bike parts, because they shared some common standards, right? They shared some thread sizes and some bolt sizes and stuff, so you could stick them together and they'd fit. If that hadn't been the case, none of it would have fit. And even though my dad, you know, I had lots of duct tape, there's only so much duct tape that will hold keep together the structural integrity of a bike. So I've been thinking about this and this bike parts idea, because when you talk about toys and you talk about what's happening technologically, in a way, the web is bike parts. And more, that's the fundamental nature of that. The reason the web is because everybody agreed on a couple of bolt sizes and thread counts and made those available to everybody. They were HTTP and HTML and a bunch of things like that, so everybody got to play. So if I made this over here, you made this over here, I could see it, we could share it, all that kind of stuff. But you still had to know HTML, and you still had to know all that stuff, and most people didn't. So it was a limited group of people who could participate in that, and the rest of us just sort of read it. Or we just, you know, we went to a site and we read about it, or maybe we could do some interactive things, but it was a relatively small community of people who could dive into those bike parts and make stuff. Now what's changing now, and I actually want to show you this. I'm showing you this Apple commercial, even though I'm from Google, because I used to work on Apple and I have a lot of heart for this. And everybody remembers the 1984 commercial. Few people remember this one, but it was from the late 80s. And I want to show it to you because it's basically the same thing I'm saying now. It's just that the context is different. So I hope sometimes these break. These videos are tough to see on a screen this size, but see how this goes.
We are entering a whole new era, the decade of positive change. Around the world, organizations have realized that you cannot intimidate human beings into productivity. The key is to let people do what they do best, whatever way works best for them. At the same time, fundamental principles of mass production give ordinary people access to powerful technology. That which was affordable to the few becomes available to the many. Mass production becomes mass productivity. The Industrial Revolution meets the Age of Enlightenment. The walls have come down. Opportunity has gone up. And your only limits will be the size of your ideas and the degree of your dedication. People, this is an exciting time to be alive.
So I just love, I mean, I could just watch that over and over. The great thing, there's a little story behind this. So a friend of mine wrote this, and they were casting for it, and it just was not happening because it all felt really fake and like an ad. And until somebody said, well, I know this teacher who's excited about this stuff. And that was him. And he came in, and he didn't need to think about it. He didn't need any coaching, because he was living it. Now, in a perfect world, I would trade all the computers in the world and all the internetness in the world for that guy to be everywhere. I mean, so let's just get that straight. So I feel that way. So we'll talk about technology and all that stuff, but I'm not saying technology is going to solve everything. But the point there is interesting, because what he was talking about back then is an individual computer on your desk. Cost $2,000. You had to buy every piece of software that you ran and put it on that computer, and you were limited by that computer. That is completely pre-internet. So the story doesn't change that much at the top level, but what changes is that box of bike parts that's available to anyone is exploding. And not just in ways that are passive, but ways that are participatory. I could go into this story about this thing called the cloud, but it gets a little geeky. But the point is, the percentage of people who actually get to create using all these tools and all this connectivity is exploding. A lot of our job at Google is taking all the complexity of computers and the tediousness and all that stuff and putting it behind the curtain so anybody can use these tools. And if you think about what's happening, the accessibility to computing power and the complexity of using that power is going to zero. Even a few years ago, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars to make a website. You had to host it, you had to buy software, you had to pay developers. That's almost at zero now. So the line between actually playing and doing that used to be separated by complexity and cost is really going away. Just this year, the sales of semiconductors, chips, to individuals was higher than the sale of semiconductors to companies and governments. When you think about that, it's kind of representative of 5 minutes till Q&A. Well, I better hurry. Okay. Sorry, I do love to talk about this stuff. The big picture is that I don't know what will happen 5 or 10 years from now, but the ability for kids, for anyone, to go beyond to the line between playing and doing, and ideally at work, the line between doing and playing, will be erased. So if you were playing with those bike parts, yeah, you'd be able to play with those bike parts, and half the genius of those bike parts was I was limited to that crappy selection, and I had to come up with something. And I take that seriously. But now, if I'm a kid, I could go online and I could go to a free CAD/CAM online software that was really easy to use, and I could design some bike parts. And I could, email somebody who makes bikes, and I could talk to friends, and I could actually probably, years from now, get that sort of made on a cheap numerically controlled router that could kind of make those pieces. And I'm not saying that's nirvana. I'm not saying we should turn every kid into this, and at a certain point we reach the paradox of choice where kids are so stunned by all the things they can do that they just stop. I know I feel that way often. And so a limited amount of bike parts in a box is very useful. But it's really exciting. And this is not the daily speech about how great the internet is and how many people are connected and all that kind of stuff. This is about the way that we all begin to participate in an active way, a creative way, a developmental way. We all get to make applications. We all get to draw things and design things and do all those things that previously weren't available to everybody. I want to mention also, because I want to have time for questions, a little bit. People asked about hiring at Google, and I think there's a kind of a natural transition into this. Now, when people ask me what kind of people do you hire at Google, that to me is just sort of a creepy, wrong question. I don't know how to answer that, because once you say that, there are all these people who say, well, that's not me, or I wouldn't fit, and then you get a bunch of people inside saying, I got to be that, I got to be that. So I'd actually rather talk a little bit about what I've seen. I've been there for about a year, so I've drunk a lot of Kool-Aid. So I may have a tiny bit of relation to, connection to the outside world. So here's kind of what I think makes the place work. First of all, raw smarts, just raw intelligence. Secondly, the belief that anything is solvable, anything. Thirdly, nobody around to say anything can't be done. And sometimes the joyful release from people who have so much experience that we say, we tried that in 1984, it didn't work, boss got mad, we can't do it. Which I have found to be a bit of a systemic problem. And like I said, because everything changes so much underneath, because what's possible is so different from what was possible yesterday, that phrase is particularly damning. Fourth thing, nobody being the smartest person in the room. I know that people have different views of Google and what happens there and what people are like there, but I have been shocked. I've always been shocked. The first day I got there, I was told about the reasonable person principle. And I don't know who takes credit for this. It's probably, I think it goes back to Dale Carnegie or someone like that. But it's this simple thought that whoever you meet, whoever you talk to, most likely has an idea that you couldn't come up with and that's better than yours. And if you don't find it, it's your mistake. Now, if you think about that, you know, from you know, the sort of GPA-hungry crowd that's at Google, that's a pretty interesting thing, and it's incredibly powerful. The fifth thing is an economy of excitement. Now, Google works much more like a university or a college, often in its dynamics, than a company. If you get excited about something, you call a bunch of friends who work in different things, and you say, wow, this could be so cool, this could be amazing, we should do this. Do you know anybody who can, you know, stick that onto that and make that work? Yeah, I know somebody. They're in the Zurich office. Okay, I'll call them. And there begins to be this sort of organic creation of things. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. Lastly, is that me? Oh. We have redundant systems to get me off the stage. And lastly, like a very clear mission and values. And I really hate those words because they always turn everything into sort of milquetoast. But it's true. There's a very clear sense that we, and you've heard of lots of things, organize the world's information, don't be evil, all those kinds of things. That's not really it. It's really defend the user. And defend the user means make things that people can use, bring down the cost of things that people can use so they can do more things. We are, I believe, fundamentally plumbers. Now, pretty sophisticated plumbers at some level, but we make plumbing that makes other people's contents and ideas and thoughts and groups and efforts multiply and magnify. And that's what we do really well. So I think those are the things that come together. I could go into more detail, but I'd really love to hear one of the things at Google that I truly believe in, that's the whole company and the sort of thesis is based on, is that people are more interested in what they're interested in than what you are interested in. That's that little box we have where you type stuff in. So any questions on any of this? I could talk for hours, but I'd love to hear any questions or any thoughts, and the more combative or there's no kind person in the audience who will. Oh, great. And
I'm Lindsay Weil, and I'm with. Oh, hello. I'm Lindsay Weil, and I'm with Scholastic, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. You mentioned several things: the ability to connect, raw smarts, the belief that anything is possible, and these seem to me character traits that you would want in all students. And I'm wondering just your personal thoughts on how we might be able to better foster that in kids in school so that they're more thoughtfully playful and that they're fostering more creativity.
Well, again, I mean, I don't think there's anything that's ever going to match having a teacher like that. We all remember that one teacher in our life who sort of liberated us or let us in on some secret that we finally realized, and we'll always remember that person. So I don't really think there's anything that compares to that. But next to that, I think it's just role modeling. It's kind of the difference between living driven by caution or living driven by excitement about what's possible. And fear is a very politically useful device. And I actually think that when kids feel secure and when they feel comfortable and when someone says, go ahead and make a mistake, make a big mistake. And we make a lot of mistakes at Google. In fact, one of the things we're not very good at is publicizing them as much as we should. And there's a real spirit of much more of a sort of venture capital approach to the world than a typical sort of corporate approach to the world, which is make a bunch of stuff, put it all out there, see what works. Now, we get dinged a lot for this because we have products going into their like 5th year of beta and stuff like that. But that's really the spirit of try a lot of things. People will tell you what works. And then don't get upset about the 4 that didn't work. Get excited about the 1 that did. I think we grow up and we watch our parents, and I'm even guilty of this sometimes, of saying, in an academic environment, when you try something and it doesn't work, it's a data point. It's a success. You add it to your accumulated knowledge and you go ahead. when you do something more in the corporate world and you miss, it's a failure and you are doomed and you're worthless. And that's not good. We're lucky because in software you can release and iterate. It's very hard to release like a car and then fix it every 2 weeks, although there's some habit to that. So we're very lucky that we can do that, but I think that's the spirit of failure's okay. Failure's actually encouraged is, I think, the best way to... Oh, sorry.
Will there be a Google for Kids or a Google Junior?
You know, I haven't been in a lot of conversations about this. I think one of the conversations I have been in is the thought usually about that is how do you sort of make some sort of a playground that's protected that the kids can play in, right? That sort of sifts out the best and keeps out the... And I don't think we believe that we can yet sift all that out well enough to actually make the promise. And I think it's wrong and it's unfair unless you can perfect that to say that that's true. And the founders are, I think, really sort of adamant about that you know, you can do safe search and search filtering and things like that, but it has to be completely there. If you put your trust in something like that as a parent and it's not real, I think it's horrible. If you're asking more about just creative tools and things, yeah, I think we always shoot to make our tools as broadly as accessible as possible. We don't usually target to sort of one audience. This is actually what I'm beginning to talk about a little bit more about, not necessarily tweaking different tools, but even explaining to people what we make. Most people know we make search and they don't know about the other 100 things, especially things that could be amazing for kids or for families or for that type of thing. So it's really a knowledge thing. There's a lot of amazing things out there that we do. We just, we're kind of like a big giant introvert. If you haven't noticed, we don't, we make a lot of stuff, we put it out there, but we don't really like, we don't have a lot of people who like to come talk about it.
Following up on the first question, what were some of the big mistakes and what can we all learn from them?
Big mistakes. At Google, you mean? Oh, the YouTube's still on, huh? You know, since I've only been there a year, I wasn't sort of present at a lot of the things that, and I've made a few, you know, fairly good-sized mistakes, but they wouldn't make the news, thankfully, not yet. I think sometimes we've gone into things maybe a little too early, too quickly. Sometimes you can throw things out there that aren't finished, depending on how people use them. That's a good idea or not a good idea. I can't think of any in particular, and I have to be honest with you, I'm a little concerned about the wide swath of people who may not think those are mistakes at Google who will be watching this on YouTube. So I'll have to work on that. Yeah, it's a good point.
So it's another question about kids then. How do people in Google think about applications for kids? Is it something you're open to? Because I would say if you assume that all people will use your tools equally, you may be missing an opportunity because a 4-year-old would relate to Google Earth in a very different way than a 40-year-old.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think our best hope at that is that, at least how I feel, that, you know, I'm sort of an old guy at Google. A lot of people making this stuff are in their 20s. Now, that doesn't mean they're experts and children, or but I think that what we usually try to do is just think about access, something that everybody can use. So simplifying. It's why our homepage still, you know, everybody wants to buy that homepage and just stick ads all over it, and that's not going to happen because you lose that simplicity, you'll lose that access that everybody feels. I don't know if we have specific. I know that we're working on stuff to take our products and make them incredibly useful for schools. But I don't know of any efforts. Now, that means nothing because there could be 20 efforts and I'll probably get 100 emails saying, why didn't you talk about this that I made? Why don't you talk about this? They're just all over the place. But I don't know of any in particular. It's usually, we don't usually target for audiences. We target for everybody. And, you know, it works well in some cases and not so well in others.
Google recently released your virtual world, Lively. And so thinking about Google products that can be used for education or for youth or civic engagement, can you say more about what Google's hopes are for that space and how you want it to be used for folks in this audience who are thinking about those issues?
You mean specifically Lively? Oh, I actually can't. I don't know that much about Lively, and forgive me, there's a lot of stuff that goes on at Google. I know people think it's search, but there are actually hundreds of products across enterprise and mobile and everything. I think what really interests me about the stuff we're making for kids in schools and essentially families in that whole ecosystem is more in the application space. It's this magical thing. Those of you who are parents riddled with guilt when you travel, like me, some of the things we're making, collaborative applications and things like that, where you could literally, if your kid's making a report and they make it on Google Docs and you're in a hotel someplace, get on the phone, they see the document, you see the document, they talk to you about it, you help them change things, you type in things, they see your changes, you're talking to them about what they're doing. Like, there's some magic in that. And there's some magic in the fact that in neighborhoods where not everybody can afford any particular application, that things like calendar and docs and all those things are free to anybody. So schools, so every parent, if they can get to any kind of a computer, can participate in using all those things. So I think it's more in applications where we're working right now, but there's stuff going on all over the place.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. My name's Andrea. I own a company called Think Fun. I've had the pleasure of meeting a bunch of people from Google at the TED conference, which is awesome. And I just have a thought, and I wanted to get your thinking on it. My observation is that in the workplace, it used to be that, you come in as a young person and you're working there, and everybody else has more experience, so you kind of got to pay your dues. I think that whole paradigm is really shifting. And I find myself thinking about kids as they grow up now, that the best thing we can do as parents and, whoever we are, is just listen to them. And I find myself just wanting to sprinkle 20-year-olds around the office and just have them be there and listen and talk and, have the dialogue. And so if kids coming up as they learn this sort of open-ended play and things like that, I think it's all about freedom of thinking. And it's hard for me to articulate it, but I think you know what I'm saying. I think it's a big shift coming.
It's a big shift. I mean, think about it. In the way it used to be, the older you were, the more you knew, period. Right? That was just kind of like understood. Like that was it. And so the most senior people in a company, what they said was categorically more correct based on, now, at a wisdom level, I think I wouldn't let go of that thought. And I think we actually sometimes think that that's been reversed to a degree that's perilous. But if you grew up inside of all this stuff and you feel comfortable building websites and doing all this stuff, and you, once you get there, even the people that I hire, I say, I don't know, what do you think? I mean, they grew up in it, so they're more versed in it. It's a little bit of an upside down paradigm, and I think it makes them feel empowered. It makes them feel, I mean, we've done campaigns to get people to understand about things like iGoogle and gadgets and things like that are pretty useful, and in sort of big concerted ways, and we've gotten 80 artists from around the world to make themes for iGoogle pages, and you can go download them, and lots and lots of people did that, and they signed up. But then this one kid over in Europe, I shouldn't say that, it's got to stop saying that, makes me old. One young person at Google decided that he or she really liked skiing, and it would be really useful to know like where the snow was best at any given time, and then make a little gadget, which is just a little tiny piece of software, like a little tiny website that goes, that shows you where the best skiing is at any, it just aggregates a bunch of standard information, and reached out and got a friend who's an engineer, and they worked for like, a little bit of time, and they put together, and more people signed up for that than this other big global thing. And so it's really about connecting. And if you connect and you know how to go under the hood a little bit, Well, one person can do kind of anything. And I know that's been hyperbole, and a lot of people get up and make speeches about what one person can do, but the dynamics underneath the plumbing actually have made that kind of real, so I agree. I need to get the...
Hi, Hank Williams. I love the idea of your the sort of emphasis on the idea of connecting things and how that's really key, and it makes so much sense that a play be about sort of connecting things that one might not actually think about. When you think about Google, at least Google.com, the search engine, is primarily about expressing your intent. But that starts from a place of having an intent, and yet Google is sitting on top of this sort of, all of the world's knowledge in some respect. I wonder, do you guys ever think about the idea of sort of turning that inside out and saying, well, instead of expressing your intent, if you started here, these are the ways that this is where you could go from here from A to B to C. In other words, sort of providing a mechanism for exploration that is not intent-driven.
Yeah, I don't. I still go back to the hyperlink as that's the fundamental genius, I think, of the web. Is you go up here, and once you get to a site, and on YouTube it's anything that's blue, anything that interests you, you follow it. So if you go up here and you see Apple Macintosh ad crocodiles, and you have crocodiles, and then you get to the next one, it's a crocodile eats hippo and explodes, and you click on there, and then you you go to that, and you go to hippo, then you go to, and I've always thought that was just that little underlined word that you can pursue in any direction that your interest takes you. And I look at Google News that way. Google News to me is all the stuff that's kind of happening, and then here's 1,800 stories on that topic, and they're from all over the world, so I get to read, the Pakistani point of view on what happens in Pakistan, and the American and the British, and that to me is more of that. But so we kind of do both. We just do a bad job of publicizing anything but that little box because it's so ingrained. Oops, this could be the hook. Okay. We're announcing a really cool program today, so I have to leave. Otherwise, I'd stay here.
Okay, I got the mic. Good morning. I'm Jane Clark Chermayeff, and I'd like to offer you a real playground as a laboratory, a couple of playgrounds in New York City, as a laboratory for testing out how we might use technology in a learning atmosphere. Because I think technology is actually this kind of Trojan horse in learning about science. My project right now is I'm working with the Mayor's Department for the Plan NYC. We have about 300 playgrounds all around New York City, which are being transformed. Of those 300, starting next week, we have about 100 in which we can add science learning to those playgrounds, where we're adding everything from Archimedes screws to groves of trees and so forth. But I'd really like to have you think about how do we use these real playgrounds and have technology become more than just technology. Kids use technology, but they don't understand the science behind the technology. How do we create that excitement about science?
Oh, okay. Well, I'd be happy to chat with you and glad to talk about it. Sounds like a great project. We do a lot of stuff in New York. So yeah, let's talk. Happy to do it. Oh, what do my kids watch on TV? Not terribly much. We usually keep it to videos that we like, and a couple of the as they've gotten older, they really we've kind of weaned them off generally. I'll go into specifics, but they're huge Miley Cyrus fans. I think if they lived on another planet, they would somehow figure out how to be Miley Cyrus fans. And so they're focused on a couple of those things, but they just don't watch that much TV. And I don't think they really miss it. And they like the computer, and they do like their Webkinz Nuts and Military Farm and all of those kinds of things that that they like. And we, keep that to some reasonable minimum, but not a lot. That's it. Okay, I'm getting the hook. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.